Solitary confinement is home to the most notorious, evil, and ruthless criminals on Earth. These criminals are often locked away until the day that they die. They spend their days in a small, cramped cell, often having only 1 hour of fresh air per day. They are allowed little to no outside contact, and they are under strict supervision. Starting off this countdown, we have Charles Victor Thompson. On April 30th, 1998, Charles Victor Thompson got in an argument with his ex-girlfriend and her new boyfriend. This argument left them both dead. As a result, he was sentenced to the death penalty. While waiting on death row, Charles actually managed to escape. In 2005, Charles escaped and spent 3 days on the run until he was found drunk at a payphone. He was then recaptured and placed into solitary confinement, where he waits until the day he receives the death penalty. Moving on at number 9, we have Charles Bronson. Charles Bronson was an English criminal who gained the title the most violent prisoner in Britain and Britain's most notorious prisoner. He was first arrested for armed robbery and served a 7-year sentence. Upon his release, he had a career in bare-knuckle boxing. Then, in 1988, he was convicted of conspiracy to commit another robbery. However, this time when he went back to jail, he became a more violent inmate. In fact, there were multiple times where he took inmates as hostages. He would even often fight guards and fellow prisoners. As a result, he was moved 120 times. That's right, you heard me correctly. Nowadays, he spends his time in solitary confinement, which he will probably remain until his death. In our 8th spot, we have Gary Ridgeway. Gary Ridgeway, otherwise known as the Green River Killer, was responsible for the murder of 48 women between 1980 and 1990. However, it's believed that he may have killed as many as 71 people. He then would dump the bodies along riverbanks in South King County, giving him the name the Green River Killer. He was arrested in 2001 and given 48 life sentences. Since his conviction, Ridgeway has lived in virtual isolation. He was initially going to receive the death penalty, but ended up trading information about his murders to get out of it. But even in solitary confinement, people still considered him a big threat. They feared that he was studying his surroundings and looking for weaknesses, planning to attack or to find a way out. In our 7th spot, we have Ivan Milat. Ivan Milat is considered Australia's most notorious serial killer. Between 1989 to 1993, Milat murdered 7 backpackers. He would pick them up off the side of the road, torture, kill, and then bury their bodies. As a result, he was given 7 life sentences. He spent these sentences in solitary confinement at Goulburn Supermax Prison. Prison officers say that on multiple occasions, Milat would try to escape. He would often bust his head open by banging it on his cell's wall so that he would get an external visit to the hospital and then try to escape from there. Another time he swallowed metal to get a trip to the hospital, and even once he tried to cut off his finger. He was considered a highly manipulative inmate with a high risk of self-harm. Milat spent 18 years in Supermax prison before he died of esophagus and stomach cancer. Moving on to number 6, we have Michael Swango. Michael Swango, aka the serial killer physician, poisoned over 60 of his patients, though he only admitted to causing 4 deaths. Michael Swango worked at multiple hospitals. At the first hospital, nurses began to become suspicious of him after healthy patients would mysteriously die. One nurse even caught him injecting medicine into a patient who then became ill. Michael then bounced around from hospitals, poisoning patients' food with arsenic or other poisons, or he would kill the patients by overdose of whichever drug the patient had been prescribed. In 2000, he was sentenced to 3 consecutive life terms with no possibility of parole. He is currently serving this sentence at the ADX Florence Supermax prison. There, he is confined to a 12 by 7 foot concrete cell. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with John Massie. In 1975, John Massie got into a fight with a pub's bouncer and he shot him in the chest. At the age of 26, he was sentenced to life for murder. But while in prison, Massie managed to successfully escape 3 times. His most notorious escape was when he made a makeshift rope out of sheets and a pair of heavy-duty gloves to climb over the prison wall. As a result of his escapes, he was placed in solitary confinement. He was allowed 15 minutes outside of his cell each day, and had only 8 minutes for a phone call. Other than that, he was kept locked away. He is considered one of Britain's longest serving prisoners. He was eventually released after spending nearly 43 years behind bars. In our fourth spot, we have Thomas Silverstein. Thomas Edward Silverstein was an American criminal jailed for armed robbery in 1978, but while in prison, he committed numerous other crimes. In 1983, he killed a prison officer who he stabbed multiple times. Then he murdered 2 inmates. As a result, he had to be detained in a specially designed cell at the ADX Florence Federal Penitentiary in Colorado. Due to the crimes he committed while in jail, he is considered the most violent prisoner in America. He is also referred to as America's most isolated man. Now, Silverstein was considered so dangerous that he got transferred to a federal prison in Atlanta. There he was confined in a 6-by-7-foot cell. He was constantly under surveillance. In fact, the lights in his cell were never turned off so that they could always keep an eye on him. Silverstein eventually died in prison at the age of 67. He is said to have served the longest term in solitary confinement in the federal penitentiary system. Coming in at number 3, we have Aileen Wuornos. Aileen Wuornos, often referred to as the Damsel of Death, was found guilty of killing 7 men. She claimed it was self-defense, but then later pleaded guilty to the murders. She would murder them, rob them, and then drive home in their cars. Due to this, she was named America's first female serial killer. Now, Aileen was placed in solitary confinement for quite some time, but then she started to grow paranoid. She thought that the people making her food were spitting in it, and then she also claimed that she was being attacked by a sonic weapon. As a result, she wanted the court to hurry up with her death sentence. On October 9, 2002, Aileen died by lethal injection. Moving on to number 2, we have Elizabeth Bathory. Elizabeth Bathory, otherwise known as the Countess who bathed in blood, was a serial killer in Hungary back in the 16th century. It's believed that she had killed around 650 girls. She's also considered the most vicious female serial killer in all recorded history. It's believed that her husband was a big influence in her killings. Apparently, he told her to torture her servants. He said for her to pour honey all over them and then let the bugs eat them. But her killings didn't truly start until she met a witch named Anna Darvula. This witch told Elizabeth that bathing in the blood of the young would help her maintain her youth. And that's exactly what she would do. Eventually, Elizabeth was sentenced to life in solitary confinement. She was locked up in her castle's torture chamber. The windows and doors were boarded up with her inside. There was only a small hole in which food was passed in through. On August 21st, 1611, she passed away. And in our number 1 spot, we have Robert Maudsley. Now, I've talked about Robert in my other video on dangerous criminals, and there's no way that I couldn't include him on this list. Robert Maudsley is considered Britain's most dangerous prisoner. Maudsley was originally convicted for 1 murder, however killed 3 more individuals in prison, which got him placed in solitary confinement. In 1977, Maudsley and his fellow inmate held another prisoner hostage. They ended up torturing him for 9 hours before cracking his head open and killing him. Now, it's rumored that he may have ate some of that prisoner's brain. As a result, he was deemed the real-life Hannibal Lecter. After that, he murdered 2 more inmates, which got him placed in solitary confinement. In fact, he is locked up in a glass cell underneath Wakefield Jail. He spends 23 hours of his day there. We are now at our 5th and halfway mark with Richard Lee McNair. Richard Lee McNair received 2 life sentences after being convicted of murder, attempted murder, and burglary. In 1987, McNair murdered 1 man and shot a 2nd man 4 times during a robbery that went wrong. He is currently in ADX Florence in solitary confinement. Now, here's the thing. Richard managed to escape prison 3 different times. The first time was in 1988 when he used lip balm as a lubricant to slide his handcuffs off. Then in 1992 he escaped again. And in 2006, he escaped for the last time by mailing himself out of prison. As a result, that's why he was placed into Supermax prison and in solitary confinement. But to this day, he's known as a master escapist. Making our way down the list at number 4, we have Robert P. Hanssen. Robert Hanssen was an FBI agent that sold thousands of classified documents to the Soviet and Russian intelligences. These documents outlined US strategies with regards to nuclear wars, exposed developments in the military's weapons, and detailed aspects of US counterintelligence programs. His espionage was considered as possibly the worst intelligence disaster in US history. Robert pleaded guilty to 14 counts of espionage and 1 conspiracy to commit espionage. As a result, he was sentenced to 15 consecutive life terms. He is now serving his time at the ADX Florence, where he is in solitary confinement. Now, the reason why he's in solitary confinement is because he knows way too much about highly classified materials. Therefore, he is locked away to prevent any of this information from getting further leaked. Robert will be in confinement until the day he dies. Coming in at number 3, we have Andrei Chikatilo. Andrei Chikatilo, otherwise known as the Butcher of Rostov or the Rostov Ripper, was responsible for the deaths of 56 individuals. He would lure people that he met at bus stops or train stations away to remote locations where he would then murder them. He also had cannibalistic tendencies and would eat certain parts of his victims. In 1990, he was finally caught for these heinous crimes. In fact, when he was arrested, he said that he couldn't live without murder. He compared it to a first love, calling it unforgettable. Andrei spent 2 years in solitary confinement awaiting his death penalty in 1994. Coming in at number 2, we have Ed Kemper. Ed Kemper, also known as Big Ed, is an American serial killer who killed 10 individuals. It all started back in 1964 when Ed killed his grandparents at the age of 15. He claimed that he killed them just to see what it felt like. As a result, he was locked away for 5 years. In 1969, he was released at the age of 21. But he didn't learn his lesson because he went on to murder 8 more individuals, one of them being his own mother. Eventually, he was convicted again and is now placed in solitary confinement. Ed is only allowed an hour of recreation a day and 3 showers every week. But Ed is apparently okay with this, since he said that he is happier in prison than he ever was as a free man. While in prison, he got the name Big Ed since he weighs around 300 pounds and is 6'9". This dude is massive. I don't know how he fits in that cell. And in our number 1 spot, we have Martin Bryant. Martin Bryant is responsible for one of the world's deadliest shooting sprees in Australia. He took the lives of 35 innocent individuals and injured 23 others. He was given 35 life sentences with no opportunity for parole. For the first 8 months in jail, he was held in a specially built suicide prevention cell. But now he is in solitary confinement. Back in 2010, a reporter visited Bryant and claimed, and I quote, "Bryant lives the most hideous existence imaginable. He is in solitary confinement, grossly obese, and not allowed to see anyone except immediate family. Apparently, because he is suicidal, he is often drugged up so that he won't harm himself." The reporter also stated that he was placed in solitary confinement because he loves hearing about himself and what he did. So solitary confinement is a way to deprive him of this. Starting off this countdown, we have the Man in the Iron Mask. The Man in the Iron Mask is the name given to an unidentified prisoner arrested in 1669 or 1670. He was imprisoned during the reign of King Louis XIV of France. Now, what's so scary about this prisoner is how his identity was always kept unknown. He was forced to wear a mask that blocked off his face. Some say he wore a black velvet mask, while others reported that it was a full-on iron mask. Apparently, the guards were ordered to shoot this man if he ever removed the mask. On top of that, he was kept in solitary confinement with double doors. He spent the rest of his life there until he died on November 19th, 1703. Moving on to number 9, we have Jesse Pomeroy. Jesse Pomeroy, otherwise known as the Boston Boy Fiend or the Boy Torturer, was convicted of countless murders at the age of 14 in 1875. He would abuse, torture, and then kill his victims. In fact, he was the youngest person in the history of Massachusetts to be convicted of first-degree murder. When Jesse was caught, he admitted to the murders and was sentenced to live in the Westboro Boys Reform School until he was 18. However, while at the school, he went on to commit other murders. That's when he was sentenced to prison and was placed in solitary confinement. His only interactions were with his guard and his mom, who would visit him once a month. In our 8th spot, we have Ian Manuel. In 1990, when Ian Manuel was only 13 years old, he shot a woman in the face, blowing out part of her jaw during a robbery. Thankfully, she survived, but as a result of his crime, he was tried and convicted as an adult. As a result, he was sentenced to 65 years in prison. He was one of the youngest inmates in the Tampa State Penitentiary. Manuel spent 15+ years in isolation, making him the longest serving inmate in solitary confinement in Florida. Eventually, he was released after the woman he shot actually fought for his freedom, claiming everyone does dumb things when they're young, and she didn't want him to waste his life in jail. In our 7th spot, we have Ian Brady. Between 1963 and 1965, Ian Brady and his accomplice tortured, abused, and killed 5 individuals. They would bury their bodies on the moors outside of Manchester, which gave them the name the Moors Murderers. The crimes they committed were horrific, and Brady expressed no remorse. As a result, he was held in solitary confinement. His only contact with the outside world was through letters. It's said that on his free time he would memorize whole pages of Shakespeare and Plato and then recite them to himself. He would also often interact with television programs. Brady died in prison on May 15, 2017 at the age of 79. Making our way down the list, number 6, we have Dennis Rader. Between the years of 1974 to 1991, American serial killer Dennis Rader took the lives of 10 individuals. In 2005, he was convicted for his crimes, and now he's facing 175 years in solitary confinement without the possibility of parole. Now, Dennis likes to go by the name BTK, or the BTK Strangler, which stands for Bind 'em, Torture 'em, and Kill 'em. So that says a lot about who this guy is. But thankfully, he is locked away and has no chance of escaping. To this day, Dennis is considered one of the most diabolical serial killers in American history.
Sliding into our number 7 slot is Robert King. Robert and Abbott, who Jared just mentioned, were part of the Angola 3 along with Herman Wallace. They were put in solitary confinement at Angola prison for decades. Robert was initially incarcerated for armed robbery. While in prison, he was convicted of a prison murder back in 1973 and was put in solitary confinement for 29 years before his conviction was overturned. So of the 32 full years he spent in jail, only 3 of them weren't in solitude. In 2001, a new trial was ordered for his case and he was indicted yet again, but King decided to accept a plea deal for lower charges instead of serving more time. He was released the following year.
Coming at number 4, we have Jesse Pomeroy. This story is almost something of legend, and unlike most of the people on this list, it made sense why they would lock this guy away in solitary confinement. Jesse Pomeroy was arrested at age 14 for murdering a ton of kids. He was taken to a juvenile corrections facility where he killed more kids, and then he was locked up in a cell for the rest of his life. Coming in at number 3, we have Robert King. Robert King was one of 3 members of the Angola 3 who were locked up way back in the 70s. They were convicted of killing a corrections officer, and from day 1, the 3 of them were thrown in solitary confinement. Out of the 3, Robert was the luckiest. I know that sounds crazy, but when you hear what happened to the other 2 members, you will know what I'm talking about. Robert spent 29 years in solitary confinement, day in and day out. He was supposed to serve the rest of his life in there, but when his case was revisited, there was a ton of information that didn't add up, and his case was overturned. He was able to walk out of there a free man after taking a plea deal.
Starting off this countdown, we have Richard Reid. In 2003, Richard Reid was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences and 110 years with no parole. Reid, also known as the Shoe Bomber, attempted to detonate a shoe bomb in 2001 while aboard American Airlines Flight 63 that was going from Paris to Miami. In 2006, The Telegraph wrote an article detailing the life of Richard in solitary confinement. They said that for 23 hours of the day he was locked in his small cell. The cell is equipped with motion sensors, video cameras, and he has someone constantly monitoring him. Every half hour he is checked in on by the guards through a small window in his door. His meals are passed through a slot in the door and have to be eaten in the cell. That would drive me insane. I would not fare well while in solitary confinement. And at number 9 we have Kaboni Savage. Sorry if I pronounced that wrong. Kaboni Savage is an American drug dealer and murderer. He has committed a number of crimes, but the one that landed him in solitary confinement was when he killed 6 family members in a firebombing. The family was the Colemans. Eugene Coleman was going to testify against Savage in a drug trial. As a result, he had Eugene's mother's home firebombed, which resulted in the death of 6 individuals, including Eugene. But he was convicted of murdering 12 people. As a result, he was given the death sentence. In fact, he is the first man from Philadelphia in modern history to receive a federal death sentence. Savage currently spends his days in solitary confinement waiting for his death penalty. Coming in at number 8 we have Dzhokhar Tsarnaev. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev was sentenced to death in 2015 after he was responsible for the Boston Marathon bombing on April 15, 2013. The bombing resulted in the death of 3 people and injured around 280 others. He now spends his days in solitary confinement in ADX Florence until he receives his death penalty. But like the guard said, the death penalty is an easy way out of the crimes. Solitary confinement is the real hard punishment. Making our way down the list at number 7 we have Barry Mills. Barry Mills lived a life of crime. He was incarcerated at a young age, and from there he grew to be a brutal leader of a prison gang. This gang was huge across prisons. It resulted in numerous prison wars. In fact, he was still actively recruiting members while behind bars. Being placed into solitary confinement couldn't even stop this. Barry was placed into solitary confinement in 2002 after being one of the 40 people charged with committing 32 murders. This gave him the name the Vengeful Killer. Now, Barry is a pretty terrifying looking inmate. He would always wear dark sunglasses because his eye got damaged in a prison fight. Barry spent his time in solitary confinement until 2018 when he passed away. Moving on to number 6 we have Joseph Duncan. Joseph Edward Duncan III was responsible for the kidnapping and deaths of the Grown family. In 2005, Joseph went on a frenzy, stalking the Grown family for days before finally attacking. He killed 4 out of the 5 family members, but he is responsible for the death of many others. As a result, he was given the death penalty and is currently living in solitary confinement until the day he dies.
Coming in at number 6 we have the Man in the Iron Mask. This story is a legend that has been somewhat lost in time, but people to this day have been trying to find out who the Man in the Iron Mask was. He was taken into prison in 1669 and he stayed in a cell by himself until he died in 1703. The question is, why did this prisoner have to wear a mask the entire time? What could he have done to be forced to wear a mask day in and day out, be kept in a cell by himself, and there was an order to kill him if he ever took off his mask? This was when King Louis XIV was in power, and people think that the Man in the Iron Mask could have been his older brother who was the rightful heir to the throne. That is why no one was allowed to see his face. Coming in at number 5 we have Sam Mandez. It seems that Ian Manuel wasn't the only one who was sent to a maximum security prison when he was only a kid. Sam Mandez was convicted of killing a woman when he was only 14 years old. He was sentenced to life in prison without the opportunity for parole, and through his stay in prison he was thrown in and out of solitary. The wild thing is, if you go back and revisit the case, there's almost zero evidence linking him to the murder of this woman. They might have taken away this kid's life and he didn't even do anything wrong. Thankfully, because he was locked up at such a young age, his case was revisited and he was later released from prison. But this was after 26 years in prison. Because he was in and out of solitary confinement, his mother said it had almost been 10 years since she last saw her son.
Next up we have Thomas Silverstein. Silverstein was an American convict, very high profile inmate who spent a significant part of his life in solitary confinement. He was born in 1952 and he landed himself in prison for armed robbery. He spent the rest of his life in the slammer after a series of violent incidents while in prison. He took the lives of 3 prisoners while he was involved with the Aryan Brotherhood, beginning with a man named Danny Atwell. For this, he received a full life sentence. Eventually, he took the life of a prison guard, Merle Klutz, at the Marion Penitentiary in Illinois in 1983. After that, he was placed in solitary confinement. and he would become one of the most isolated prisoners in the United States. He spent almost 36 years in solitary, mostly in a specially designed cell at the federal prison in Florence, Colorado, known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies. In his isolated cell, he had minimal human contact, limited access to the outside world, and strict restrictions on communication. Next on the list is Richard Lee McNair. This guy is crafty, honestly, kind of impressive. It's no wonder he's in solitary confinement. If they don't keep their eyes on this guy, he'll just find a way to slip away. He was convicted after a botched robbery. One man was severely injured while the other died. McNair was responsible, of course, and was sentenced to life in prison without parole. But he managed to escape or come close to multiple times. His first attempt was in 1988. He managed to actually wiggle out of his handcuffs using lip balm. Another time he escaped through an air vent. They caught him a few days later. But this would not be the final incident. In 2006, he pulled off a Houdini level move by mailing himself out of a federal penitentiary in Louisiana. Yes, he got himself packaged and mailed away. Authorities found him a few blocks away, and this is almost even more impressive. He actually managed to convince them that he was just a jogger. For months, he was on the run. He used stolen identities and even managed to make his way into Canada, but eventually they nabbed him in 2007. Jack Henry Abbott. This guy had a rebellious streak that landed him in some serious trouble behind bars. Abbott was a convict and writer. He had this intense correspondence with author Norman Mailer from prison, which turned into the book In the Belly of the Beast. Abbott was no stranger to prison. He spent most of his life there for different crimes, but he had this knack for just making things worse and worse for himself. His rebellious behavior got him thrown into solitary confinement more than once. Imagine being stuck in a tiny cell all alone because he just couldn't play by the rules. Abbott seemed like he just couldn't help himself. This pattern continued even after his book got attention. People started talking about him. Just over a month after his release and the book is out and everything, in 1981, he stabbed a waiter at a New York City cafe, died of his injuries, and so Abbott was sent right back to prison and eventually took his own life in 2002. Next up is a guy who totally deserved to be isolated from the rest of the world, Robert Hanssen. I'm sure a lot of you have heard of this guy before. He did some incredibly disturbing stuff to women. The details are pretty horrific. He took the lives of at least 17 women, and he'd take his time. He'd often let his victims run off into the woods, giving them a chance to think they'd escape, and then he'd hunt them down like wild animals. Luckily, though, he ended up in prison. Now, here's the thing. He wasn't exactly Mr. Popular among the other inmates, as you can probably imagine, considering what he did, and because of that, they separated him from the rest of the inmates. Solitary confinement. And on one hand, yeah, this is a good thing. Solitary confinement does sound like absolute hell, which is where this guy belonged. But it is kind of frustrating knowing that he was put in solitary for his own protection. I don't know, it just seems kind of gross to me. And finally, we have Aileen Wuornos. Wuornos had a rough life from the get-go. Honestly, would have been far more shocking if she grew up to be a well-adjusted member of society. She had a string of just horrible experiences that eventually led her down a dark path. Basically, her humanity was gone, turning her completely into this cold-blooded and remorseless person. From 1989 to 1990, Aileen went on a spree targeting men in Florida while working on the streets. She would shoot her clients and then rob them, often claiming that it was done in self-defense. Aileen spent around 10 years on death row, and during this time, she was housed in a small cell, isolated from the general prison population with minimal recreational activities and restricted access to the outside world. She finally died by lethal injection in 2002.
We're now at our 5th and halfway mark with Joseph Lombardo. Joseph Patrick Lombardo, otherwise known as Joey the Clown, was a loan shark, hitman, and mobster. This guy had a life of crime. He started off as a jewel thief, then moved on to kidnapping, illegal gambling, and loan sharking. But none of those things got him placed into solitary confinement. In 2009, he was sentenced to life in prison for 7 mob murders, along with other crimes. lifetimes. He was serving his sentence at the ADX Florence, where he died at the age of 90. Moving on at number 4, we have El Chapo. Joaquin Guzman, otherwise known as El Chapo, was a leader of a huge drug cartel. In fact, the US Justice Department described it as one of the world's most prolific, violent, and powerful drug cartels. Now, he was given the name El Chapo because that means shorty, and Guzman is only 5'6". In 2014, Joaquin claimed that he killed anywhere from 2,000 to 3,000 people. Now, here's the thing. Joaquin has managed to escape almost every prison that has locked him away. This scared a lot of people. But in 2016, he was recaptured and sent to the States to be tried for a federal charge. He was found guilty and locked away at ADX Florence in solitary confinement, where he has yet managed to escape. In our third spot, we have Mark David Chapman. I'm sure a lot of you know about him because he is the man who murdered John Lennon. Rest in peace. On December 8th, 1980, Chapman waited outside of Lennon's Manhattan apartment for him to come down. When he did, he shot him 4 times in the back. Apparently he did so because of Lennon's immense fame. As a result, he was sentenced to 20 years to life in prison. He is currently held in solitary confinement in the Wendy Correctional Facility in upstate New York. The only outside interaction he gets is from his wife once a year and occasional visits from his sister and a few friends. He is part of the family reunion program, so this allows him up to 48 hours alone with his wife in his specially built prison home. That's where he will spend the rest of his life until he dies. In our second spot, we have the Unabomber. The Unabomber is the name given to Ted Kaczynski, as he was responsible for numerous mail bombings on innocent people. Apparently, Ted is a very intelligent individual. He skipped 6th grade, has an IQ of 167, and went to Harvard. It's a shame that he didn't put his intelligence to good use. Ted was responsible for sending 16 homemade bombs in the mail that killed 3 individuals and injured 23. As a result, he was charged with 3 counts of homicide and was sentenced to 8 lifetimes in prison. According to another prison inmate, he described Ted as being very weird. Apparently, he won't even go outside when he is allowed to. He spent 24 hours of his day locked away by will. But he was used to it and didn't mind it, since before being placed in solitary confinement, he spent his time in his 12 by 10 foot cabin. And in our number 1 spot, we have Charles Harrelson. Charles Harrelson was an American hitman and organized crime figure, but some of you may know him better as Woody Harrelson's father. Yes, beloved actor Woody Harrelson had a father who was a cold-blooded killer, but he was just 7 at the time when his father first went to prison. While it's said that he was responsible for the deaths of at least 20 people. In 1979, that is when Charles committed his biggest kill of all time. He took out a federal judge by the name of Judge John H. Wood Jr., the first federal judge to be killed in the 20th century. He was paid $250,000 to kill off Judge John. It was because a drug dealer was about to be sentenced by this judge, who was known as Maximum John because he always gave out really harsh punishments to drug dealers. So he got Charles to knock him off for him, but this landed him behind bars and in solitary confinement. He was there until he was 69 years old when he died from a heart attack.
Starting our list off at number 10, Daniel Chong. The 25-year-old UCSD student was detained the morning of April 21st, 2012 while visiting a friend's house. Turns out the house was suspected of being a distribution center for narcotics, and when DEA agents stormed the residence, they found exactly what they were suspecting. Detaining a total of 9 people and seizing thousands of pills, both prescription and recreational, as well as tons of guns and ammo, it seems Chong was in the wrong place at the wrong time. He genuinely had no clue about any of the business taking place, and when he was detained, they threw him in a cell without charging him and actually forgetting about him for days. Being held in a 5 by 10 foot cell with no toilet, a pee hole through the door, and a metal bench, Chong was literally kicking and screaming for someone while handcuffed and fighting for his life. Even though he heard footsteps and voices from nearby cells, no one came to check on the innocent man until April 25th. By then, Chong had already drunk his own urine and caved "Sorry Mom" into his arm using shards of glass from his glasses, a way of giving her a final goodbye. Thankfully, he was released and never charged, but would end up losing 15 pounds and suffered from PTSD. Chong would go on to sue the DEA and would settle with a deal seeing the man receive $4.1 million from the agency.
Coming in at number 9 is Frank De Palma. On the 3rd of February 1992, Frank was sent to solitary confinement just so he could be kept away from the young gang members arriving at the Eli Maximum Security Prison. He was in prison for 42 years and 9 months, and he spent 22 of those in solitary confinement. Frank said he never once stepped out of his cell in the last 5 years of it. It got to a point that anytime he was taking it into the yard, he started to panic because of all the open space and wouldn't be fine again until he was back in his cell. Frank developed agoraphobia. He started to divorce himself from all the people he used to know and the memories he had and started living in an imaginary world. On the 11th of March 2014, a warden and psychologist visited him because they realized he would be released soon, otherwise he was 100% sure they had forgotten he was even in there. By the time he was finally moved to another correctional center, Frank said he couldn't feel anything. He couldn't even speak since he hadn't done so in so long, and it actually took him a total of 7 hours just to come out of his cell. He was finally released on the 21st of December 2018.
Now on to number 8, Albert Woodfox. This man would serve more than 40 years in solitary confinement for a murder he says he didn't commit. In fact, Woodfox believes he was framed for the murder of a prison guard simply because he was a part of the Black Panther political party. Originally arrested in 1971 at just 22 years old for armed robbery, Woodfox would be sentenced to 50 years in Angola prison, which was at the time known for being one of the worst in North America. That's where he joined the Black Panthers, as he recalls the disgusting conditions the prison allowed and wanted to make a change. Unfortunately, he would be accused of murdering a guard named Brent Miller in 1972, along with fellow inmate Herman Wallace, even though there was no physical evidence linking the men to the crime. Aside from this, his conviction of the murder would be overturned twice, and finally in 2016, after accepting a plea deal to lesser charges, he would be released. To this day, the man is maintaining his innocence and made it clear that him accepting the deal wasn't an admission to guilt, but cited his age and health as the reason behind his decision.
At number 10 is Damian Echols, who relatively speaking didn't spend very long compared to the other people in this list, but I really wanted to cover him anyway. In the annals of history, some individuals have endured the most harrowing and protracted experiences of solitary confinement, with their stories revealing the astonishing resilience of the human spirit. One such figure is Damian Wayne Echols, a name entrenched into the unsettling chronicles of wrongful conviction. Echols, initially a misfit in West Memphis, Arkansas, became infamous for his unconventional attire and affinity for heavy metal music and dark poetry. In 1993, at the tender age of 18, he, along with Jesse Miskelly, were accused and convicted of the heinous unalivings of 3 younglings. Sentenced to unaliving by lethal injection in 94, Echols spent his days on Unalive Row in the Varner Unit Supermax, where he embarked on a transformative journey. His quest for enlightenment led him to Buddhism, with hours of daily meditation. Later, he delved into ceremonial magic, dedicating most of his 18-year sentence to its study. In 2010, new DNA evidence finally emerged, casting doubt on their guilt. After years of legal battles, Echols and his co-defendants were granted an evidentiary, eventually negotiated to an Alford plea in 2011, securing their release after 18 years and 75 days behind bars in total isolation. Echols' ordeal serves as a poignant reminder of the indomitable human spirit and the pursuit of justice in the face of adversity. And number 9 is Thomas Silverstein, often dubbed America's most isolated man, who endured an astonishing 28 years of no human contact during his 42-year prison sentence. His journey from initial imprisonment for armed robbery to a life without parole sentence for the brutal unaliving of 2 prisoners and a prison guard is a stark testament to the extreme consequences of his actions. In a legal battle against the Federal Bureau of Prisons, Silverstein argued that his prolonged solitary confinement violated constitutional laws on cruel and unusual punishment. Silverstein's account of his isolation paints a grim picture. A minuscule cell with unyielding steel walls, blinding artificial light that make that insistently buzzing noise 24 hours a day. He lacked basic privileges like social visits, reading materials, or even a sense of time, leaving him disoriented and trapped in a never-ending, timeless void. His outdoor recreation provided no solace, offering only a desolate landscape devoid of interaction. While his circumstances circumstances seem nightmarish, it's essential to remember the horrific crimes he committed and his association with the gangs he was in. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing like, subscribing to Most Amazing, and ringing that notification bell. At number 8 is Luis Felipe. Luis Felipe is a man who found himself in a unique and deeply disturbing situation in the American prison system. As the founder of the New York chapter of the Latin Kings gang, Luis Felipe was no stranger to criminal activity. His initial incarceration was a result of numerous criminal conspiracy charges, but it was his actions behind bars that would lead to an extraordinary sentence. Unlike most cases where solitary confinement is used as a disciplinary measure, the judge in Luis Felipe's case ordered an astonishing 45-year sentence to be served entirely in solitary confinement. Prolonged solitary confinement is widely recognized as a form of torture by the United Nations and numerous countries. In this instance, Felipe was not only isolated from the general prison population, but also prevented from interacting with anyone except his attorney and non-existent close family. This unprecedented decision paints a stark picture of the extreme measures taken within the justice system, raising questions about the psychological toll such isolation can inflict on an individual. And number 7 is Mark David Chapman. Mark David Chapman's chilling act of violence, forever intertwined in the tragic loss of John Lennon, offers a glimpse into the unsettling world of long-term solitary confinement. Chapman's delusional beliefs and violent actions not only took the life of a music legend, but also condemned him to an isolated existence within the prison system. While not the traditional solitary confinement that many might imagine, Chapman's situation is one of partial isolation. This means that he's separated from the general prison population, but still permitted access to certain privileges like the library. This unique arrangement is a reflection of the genuine concerns for his safety, given the intense emotions Lennon's unaliving stirred among fans. At number 6 is Herman Wallace, a man whose story is a stark reminder of the harrowing turmoil that solitary confinement can exact on the human psyche. Convicted of bank robbery in 1971, Wallace found himself serving a 50-year sentence at Angola prison, where he would cross paths with Albert Woodfrox, setting in motion the tragic saga of the Angola Three. Without a shred of concrete evidence, Wallace and Woodfox were unjustly convicted of the unaliving of a prison guard. Wallace endured a staggering 42 years in solitary confinement, an unimaginable feat of endurance. His spirit remained unbroken even as his health deteriorated. A debilitating case of liver disease became his cruel companion. Driven by the relentless efforts of his family and activists, Wallace was finally granted release to savor 3 precious days of freedom before succumbing to liver disease failure. His story stands as a haunting testament to the inhumanity of prolonged solitary confinement, a chapter in history that should never be forgotten. And number 5 is Robert Maudsley, aka Hannibal Lecter. The longest-serving British prisoner in solitary confinement, had a troubled youth marked by violence claimed to father. In the 1960s, he turned to night walking due to substance addiction and sought psychiatric help after attempting self-harm, citing disturbing voices in his head which urged him to assassinate his parents. He said that if he had, he would have never committed any of his future unalivings. In 1974, he strangled John Farrell, who had shown Maudsley pictures of his kidnapped victims. He turned himself in, leading to his institutionalization at Broadmoor Hospital. In 1977, Maudsley and another inmate brutally tortured and eliminated another inmate, resulting in another conviction and transferred to Wakefield Prison, where he brutally attacked and offed 2 fellow inmates, displaying extreme violence and earning him the nickname Hannibal the Anthropophage, because that's better somehow. Deemed far too dangerous, Maudsley occupies a 2-cell basement unit and is always escorted by 4 officers outside of his cell. At number 4 is James Marcello, aka Little Jimmy, aka Jimmy Light, aka Jimmy the Man. In April 2005, the spotlight shone on front boss of the Chicago outfit and his half-brother, Michael Mickey Marcello, as they faced charges for racketeering, conspiracy, loan sharking, running illegal gambling schemes, and 18 separate counts of unaliving people. Marcello's bid for freedom saw him offering a staggering $12.5 million worth of homes and bond collateral, a desperate attempt thwarted by the US District Judge. The former boss is now serving a life sentence in solitary at, you guessed it, the ADX Florida Supermax facility. Speaking of which, number 3 is Thomas Silverstein, America's most isolated man. This dude just can't seem to stop offing people. Thomas Silverstein Silverstein's life in prison began at 19 for armed robbery, and he was sent to San Quentin. After some more crimes, he landed in Leavenworth, Kansas with a 15-year sentence, and in 1980 he earned a life sentence for eliminating an inmate who wouldn't be a pawn in his substance distribution scheme. He moved to USP Marion, enduring extreme solitary confinement, but nevertheless he was accused of another murder in 81 and got another life sentence, leading to his feud with rival gang member Raymond Lee Cadillac Smith, who he also eventually assassinated as the guards did nothing to keep the two apart. Then, after that, he orchestrated a guard's assassination and faced more life sentences. The guard's assassination served as the final straw, leading to a 23-year lockdown at the prison and inspiring a whole new prison design. Silverstein spent 36 years in solitary there, passing away as the longest held prisoner in the Bureau of Prisons. Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, who, along with his brother Tamerlan, orchestrated the infamous and devastating Boston Marathon. The brothers placed pressure cooker near the finish line, causing 3 people to lose their lives and astounding 281 others to be injured in the aftermath. Just 3 days later, after their faces were revealed to the public thanks to CCTV footage, they fatally assassinated MIT police officer Sean Collier, not because they were identified, but because they wanted to steal his firearm. Then they hijacked an SUV and engaged in a wild with the police, even throwing at them. As Dzhokhar was trying to escape law enforcement, he drove over his own brother, dragging him under the stolen SUV about 30 feet. His brother didn't survive, and Dzhokhar abandoned the SUV and vanished on foot into the night, triggering an unprecedented manhunt of epic proportions. He was eventually discovered hiding in a boat in a Watertown backyard not far from where he had ditched the SUV. Inside the boat, scribbled on the cabin wall with a pen, the bomber left a note claiming the responsibility for the marathon attack, citing vengeance for US military actions in Afghanistan and Iraq. It coldly referred to the innocent victims as collateral damage, drawing eerie parallels to the casualties of war. He even expressed complete lack of remorse for having unalived his own brother. Ultimately, justice caught up with Tsarnaev. He faced trial where he's convicted of a staggering 30 counts, and his fate was sealed with a sentence of capital punishment. At number 1 is Klara Homolka, who gets the top spot for being Canadian. Sure doesn't make me proud. Back in the late 1990s, Klara Homolka and her partner in crime, Paul Bernardo, engaged in some truly heinous acts, responsible for the demise of not 1, not 2, but 3 innocent women, one of whom happened to be Klara's own sister, Tammy. Now, once her co-conspirator got nabbed by the authorities in '83, Klara decided to switch gears and claim that she was actually dragged into this nightmare against her will, painting herself as the unwilling accomplice. She then struck a deal that landed her a relatively lenient sentence of 12 years, and all she had to do was spill the beans on Paul. Jump back to the year 2007, and guess who's back on the streets? That's right, you guys, she didn't need to escape prison because, well, they let her out onto the streets willy-nilly. That's right, Homolka, now a mom of 2 and remarried, and get this, she's volunteering at a school in Montreal. Parents everywhere were like, hold up, are we seriously gonna let a former serial unaliver be around our miniature clones? Well, that was quite the unsettling journey through the lives of those who find themselves eternally secluded from the outside world.
We're gonna start things off with Robert Maudsley. This guy is the longest serving British prisoner in solitary confinement. Robert Maudsley's story is pretty chilling. He's known by a couple different fun nicknames that may give you a pretty good idea about the type of guy he is. Hannibal the Cannibal, Brain Eater, yeah, wonder what he did to earn those titles. So in the 70s, Maudsley took the lives of at least 4 men, 3 of them in prison after being convicted for the first. Now Maudsley was obviously a dangerous guy, but in his defense, his victims were not the best people. In fact, many would consider them the scum of the earth. So we almost have a bit of a Dexter situation on our hands, if anyone remembers that show. Regardless of how awful his victims were themselves, though, it was clear this guy was a bit of a danger to the other prisoners, and in 1983 he was placed in solitary, where he's been for most of his time behind bars. He spends around 23 hours a day alone in a cell. Oh, and the Brain Eater nickname, apparently there's a rumor that he may have consumed part of the brain of one of his victims, but it's not 100% known if that's true or not. Next up, we have Charles Bronson. Not Death Wish Charles Bronson, but the British dude. This guy is a whole different kind of character. His real name is Michael Peterson, but he's better known as Charles Bronson, named after the actor. This guy has spent a ton of his life behind bars, and he's kind of infamous for being a troublemaker in prison. He's been in and out of jail since the 70s for all sorts of stuff. He's got quite the reputation. Bronson has spent a good chunk of his time in solitary, like a lot lot. And I mean, we're talking about a guy who's known for his violent outbursts and all that, so they kind of couldn't figure out what to do with him, so they just like stuck him in isolation. Now, being in solitary for anyone is tough, but for a guy like Bronson, who's already got a reputation for being a bit unhinged, it's a whole other level of crazy. He's become kind of a controversial figure because some people see him as a victim of the system, while others think he's just brought it all on himself with his wild behavior. In terms of what he did, he first landed himself in jail for armed robbery, but he also had a hobby of fighting prison guards, or just anyone. Dude just loves to fight. If you want to watch a wild movie, check out Bronson, starring Tom Hardy as the titular Charles Bronson. Pretty awesome movie. Next on the list, we have the Angola Three. So these were three guys, Albert Woodfox, Herman Wallace, and Robert King, stuck in the Louisiana State Penitentiary, also known as Angola Prison. They spent an insane amount of time in solitary confinement, most of their adult lives, a little over 40 years. So Woodfox and Wallace got thrown in solitary in the 70s for taking the life of a prison guard. The thing is, there are a lot of people who believe they were set up because they were Black Panthers fighting for better conditions in the prison. Then there's Robert King, who was in solitary for 29 years for a crime he apparently didn't even do. He finally got released when they found out he was innocent. These guys endured extreme isolation in tiny cells, barely seeing the light of day. In the end, Albert Woodfox got out in 2016 after striking a deal, but Herman Wallace died just days after his release. Next on the list, we have Stephen Slevin. If you want to talk about neglect, this next case is pretty much the definition. His story is a bit different from the usual tough guy prison tales. Slevin was just a regular guy who hit a bit of a rough patch in life. Back in 2005, Slevin got arrested in New Mexico for a DUI. Instead of a quick trial, things got all bungled up. He ended up stuck in jail for nearly 2 years without even getting a trial. Just sitting there, waiting. Very long time to be sitting around. And to make matters worse, he spent a big chunk of that time in solitary confinement, alone in a tiny cell for close to 2 years. Little to no human contact, no fresh air. By the time they finally sorted out his case, Slevin, as you could probably imagine, was in pretty bad shape, mentally and physically. He later sued the county, and in 2013, he got a settlement for around $15 million, but he passed away not long after that. Alright, let's bring it back to the scarier side though, with Edmund Kemper, someone who is exactly where he should be, away from everyone else. So Kemper was this big, imposing dude. He's kind of like a real-life Jason Voorhees. He stood at 6'9" and had a very chilling intelligence about him. It's a bad combo, ill-intentioned and smart. Not great. He had a twisted relationship with his family, especially his mom, and this messed up dynamic played a big role in what he ended up doing. From 1972 to 1973, Kemper took the lives of several young women, and the details of the crimes are pretty horrific. He would do some gruesome stuff to the victims' bodies afterward. Not only that, but he also ended the life of his own mother and his grandparents years before. Now, when they finally caught him, Kemper actually confessed to everything. It was almost like he wanted to make sure he'd never get out. He actually wanted the death penalty, but capital punishment had been suspended in California, so he received 8 consecutive life sentences, and he spent almost his entire time in prison in solitary confinement. In interviews, he's talked about how he waived his right to parole because he believed he deserved to stay in that small cell.
Coming in at number 10, we have Steve Selvin. We're going to kick off this list, of course not with the longest stay in solitary confinement, but someone who ended up there for one of the craziest reasons you will ever hear. Steve Selvin was driving home one day and then he got pulled over by the police and they thought he had been drinking. They arrested him and then took him to jail. Now, if you get arrested for a DUI, what do you think would be the next course of action? Well, you probably get your one phone call and then everything would be set up so you eventually stand trial. Well, that's not the case here. Steve was thrown into a jail cell, but some of the other people in there thought that he might try to take his own life. The guards wanted to prevent this, so they put him in solitary confinement. I don't really understand the correlation. You're worried about someone's mental health, so you lock them up in a cage by themselves. And this was all before Steve Selvin had the opportunity to stand trial. After this, he was then left in solitary confinement for 2 years. 2 years rotting away in a cell without any justice taking place. Thankfully, one day he was released and he sued the city and was awarded $15 $15 million.
Coming in at number 5 is Adam Capay. 23-year-old First Nations man Adam Capay was moved to solitary confinement back in 2012 after killing another inmate during a fight. Adam is in this plexiglass-lined cell at Thunder Bay Jail for 24 hours a day, just rotting under the artificial light. He spent 4 years in isolation, but the Community Safety Minister David Orazietti refuses to let him join the rest of the prison again. Adam has been alone for 4 years and still hasn't had his trial yet, which is ridiculous. He is one example of the thousands of prisoners in Ontario that spend more than 2 weeks in solitary confinement and get forgotten about. His case actually came to light after a prison guard tipped off the head of Ontario's Human Rights Commission, Renu Mandhain. She went to visit the jail and found him alone in the corner of his room after being in there for nearly 1,500 days. He had major memory loss, he couldn't speak, and because of the fake light, he couldn't tell when it was night or day. Mr. Orazietti still refused to release him even after her pleas.
On to number 4, Jerry Hartfield. In 1976, Hartfield was arrested after his fingerprints were found on a Dr. Pepper bottle located where a woman was assaulted and murdered. Although he confessed to the crime, he admits he was coerced into doing so, and given the fact that he was a black man in the South in the 70s with an IQ of 50 or 60, well, let's just say he wasn't given much of a chance from the start. It wouldn't be long before he would be sentenced to death. However, 4 years later, he would be requested to have a retrial after one of the jurors' issues with the death penalty was overlooked. Instead of giving the man a retrial, prosecutors in Texas tried to change his sentence to a life sentence, but after 3 years he would be issued a retrial. Prior to this, however, the governor decided he would change the sentence himself, avoiding a trial. The judges pushing for a retrial thought the prosecution was taking over from that point, and the governor's office thought the case was closed. In a sense, everyone thought someone else was handling the case, but that just led to a lot of miscommunication and years of Hartfield's life that he spent in prison. In 2006, he realized someone made a mistake after 23 more years locked up and decided to do something about it. When all was said and done, the state tried blaming Hartfield for not bringing their mistake to light from 1983 until 2006. However, from 2006 until 2013, when he pushed for a review of his case, his lawyers made a strong enough case that the state agreed with, claiming his speedy trial rights had been violated. This led to his release only after his lawyers appealed the court's initial decision in 2015 to sentence him to life in prison for a crime he seemingly didn't even commit.
Coming in at number 3, we have Gary Ridgeway, also known as the Green River Killer. This monster of a man was convicted of 49 separate murders. His victims consisted of women of all ages, most being sex workers. He would strangle and dump their bodies in forested areas before coming back later on and having intercourse with their dead bodies. In November of 2001, Gary was arrested at work for murdering these women nearly 20 years prior. He was sentenced to 48 life sentences with no possibilities of parole, and 1 life sentence on top of that. A further 10 years was added since he tampered with evidence, making his total time 480 years on top of the 48 life sentences he already had. That's like so many people's lifetimes. In January of 2004, he was moved to solitary confinement at Washington State Penitentiary, and that's where he still is.
At number 10 is Jose Antonio Acosta Hernandez, aka El Diego. If evil is a measure of your body count, then Jose here tops the leaderboards. El Diego is the former leader of La Línea, the leading faction of the Juarez cartel. Originally established as a team of heavily armed ex and active duty police officers, this unit has evolved into the enforcement arm of the cartel, safeguarding narcotics traffickers from the criminal underworld. In 2012, Hernandez himself was sentenced to 3 consecutive life sentences, plus an additional 20 years for his involvement in a litany of crimes, including racketeering, narcotics trafficking, money laundering, and of course the big M. And that M is big indeed, as Hernandez has confessed to orchestrating or partaking in over 1,500 unalivings between 2008 and 2012 alone. Hernandez finds himself serving not 1, not 2, but 3 consecutive life sentences plus an additional 20 years. His new permanent home is the ominous and supremely fortified confines of the ADX Florence Supermax facility, touted as the most secure correctional facility on the planet, even above maximum security prisons. Here, Hernandez resides in solitary confinement, as do all prisoners at ADX Florence, where he'll spend the rest of his days sitting with the consequences of his malevolent actions. If you're enjoying the video so far, you can support the channel by pressing the like button, subscribing to Most Amazing Top 10, and ringing that notification bell. Those who do can rest easy knowing that they're nowhere near as evil as number 9, Terry Nicholas. Terry Nicholas, American domestic terrorist, infamous for his role in 1995 Oklahoma City bombing. Born on April 1st, 1995, Nicholas had an array of short-term jobs from farming to real estate before a fateful encounter with Timothy McVeigh during a stint in the US Army. The alliance culminated in the of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building on April 19, 1995, claiming 186 lives. In 1997, Nicholas was found guilty in a federal trial on charges including conspiracy to use weapon of mass destruction and involuntary man unaliving, which stemmed from the tragic demise of federal law enforcement personnel. Although the plaintiff sought the capital punishment, aka the unalive penalty, the jury couldn't reach a consensus, and so instead he served a life sentence without parole. He also faced state charges during yet another trial in Oklahoma, where he was convicted of a staggering 161 counts of first-degree unaliving, arson, and conspiracy, but yet again the state jury was unable to decide on whether to oppose capital punishment. As a result, he's serving 161 consecutive life sentences at ADX Florence in Colorado. On the other hand, his co-conspirator Timothy McVeigh, who planned and carried out the whole wasn't so lucky. McVeigh was executed in 2001. At number 8 is Luis Felipe, aka King Blood. Hailing from Havana, Cuba, Felipe made his way to the United States during the Mariel boat lift of 1990, an event famously depicted in Scarface. Among the so-called undesirables sent to the US was Luis Felipe, who would end up in Chicago, where he would first come into contact with the notorious Latin King street gang. Fast forward to 1986 and he moved to the Big Apple, where he founded the New York chapter of the Latin Kings. But eventually Luis Felipe was arrested on unaliving charges after he unalived his girlfriend while under the influence, serving 9 years at the Collins Correctional Facility in New York, but the tale only gets darker from here. See, in 95, he found himself convicted of orchestrating multiple unalivings from behind bars, penning the orders to fellow Latin kings on the outside. This led to his sentencing of life imprisonment, plus an additional 45 years served in strict solitary confinement with absolutely zero communication with the outside world. Currently, King Blood resides in the notorious ADX Florence. At number 7 is Kaboni Savage, whose name isn't just fitting, it's an understatement. Emerging as a dealer in Hunting Park, Savage ascended to become a kingpin, orchestrating the distribution of vast quantities of nose powder throughout North Philadelphia from 98 to 04. Savage's malevolence escalated when he was accused of personally slaying a stranger. Notably, he even ordered hits on competitors and adversaries, including orchestrating the demise of a rival dealer, Carlton Brown. His ruthless grip extended to intimidation, with threats aimed at witnesses' families, but unfortunately those threats turned out to be promises. Enter Eugene Twin Coleman, once in cahoots with Savage, who testified against Savage in a narcotics trial, leading to Savage's conviction. Savage retaliated by orchestrating the arson of Marcella Coleman's house, and the claimed 6 lives. Kaboni Savage ended up receiving 13 consecutive unaliving sentences, while Lewis was only given a 40-year sentence on account of the stark differences on the level of remorsefulness displayed during their testimonies. At number 6 is Daria Nikolvania Saltykova, commonly known as Salty Chica. Born into a rich Russian noble family in the year 1730, Saltykova lived alone in her estate after the passing of her husband. You see, Saltykova had some serious connections in high places, rubbing elbows with the powerfully elite, but eventually the persistence of victims' relatives caught the attention of none other than Empress Catherine II. Saltykova was arrested and held for 6 years while authorities held a painstaking investigation which counted as many as 138 suspicious unalivings. After a public trial, Saltykova was found guilty of ending the lives of at least 38 female serfs through brutal beatings and torture. Eventually, she was sentenced to life imprisoned in Moscow, where she spent the first 11 out of 33 years chained in a basement dungeon without a window and only given a candle during meals. At number 5 is Jesse Pomeroy. Born in 1859, he might not hold the record for longest time spent in solitary, but his story is a chilling tale of a young boy turned vicious predator. Pomeroy's reign of terror began in 1871 when he lured young boys from the outskirts of Charlestown and subjected them to brutal confrontations involving belts, fists, and blades. While none of his victims perished, the violence was shocking to say the least. What's truly disturbing is that when Pomeroy's family moved to Boston, the attacks ceased in Charlestown but resumed in the new location. He was eventually captured and sentenced to prison until the age of 18. Shockingly, he was paroled at the tender age of 14, only to have another girl go missing and the mangled body of yet another individual discovered by the river shortly after his return home. Despite a lack of concrete evidence, I mean, the timing is kind of paints the picture, suspicion immediately fell on Pomeroy. He adamantly refused to confess, but the police eventually unearthed missing individually in his basement. Although it's suspected that he may have taken even more lives, no additional bodies were found. Pomeroy would go on to spend an astonishing 57 years behind bars, with the first 41 of those years spent in solitary confinement, before being released into the general prison population. During this long, lonely incarceration, he taught himself languages, reportedly becoming fluent in German, a skill he honed in solitude. At number 4 is Robert Strode, infamous as the Birdman of Alcatraz. He endured one of history's lengthiest periods of solitary confinement. A life marked by turbulence and brutality led him down a dark path. At just 13, he fled home, ultimately becoming a brothel keeper by 18. In 1909, an altercation resulted in Strode ending a man's life, leading to a 12-year federal prison sentence. Inside the prison walls, his reputation for violence persisted. In 1916, he fatally impaled the guard, initially earning a unaliving sentence, later commuted to life imprisonment. Amidst the darkness, an unlikely glimmer of humanity emerged. While at Leavenworth, Strode discovered an injured bird, sparking a passion for keeping it alive. His meticulous care for birds and groundbreaking research on aviation diseases earned him respect in the ornithological community. Yet, despite his newfound purpose, Strode's explosive temper and violent tendencies consigned him to solitary confinement, where he spent his days alone, finding solace only in the company of the birds he cared for. 3 is Robert Maudsley. Few stories are as chilling as that of Robert Maudsley, the man known as Hannibal the Man-Eater. Imagine spending nearly half a century in solitary confinement, locked away from the world for the majority of your existence. Maudsley's tale was one of unparalleled isolation, darkness, and infamy. Maudsley, hailing from Britain, achieved the dubious distinction of being the longest serving inmate in the country, with a staggering 49 years behind bars. And what truly sets him apart is the mind-numbing fact that he spent nearly 45 of those years, accounting to a mind-boggling 16,000 consecutive days, that he spent in solitary confinement. His existence was confined to his cell, where he grappled with the ghosts of his past and the grim reality of his present. His reputation as Hannibal the Man-Eater stemmed from a gruesome crime committed within the walls of the Broadmoor Psychiatric Hospital. Allegedly, he tormented a fellow patient for a gruesome 9 hours, eventually displaying the lifeless patient to shocked guard. The description of the victim's head, which was cracked open like a boiled egg, with a spoon protruding, left an indelible mark on Maudsley's notoriety, despite his denials of actually engaging in consuming the flesh of that individual. At number 2 is Keith Lamar. Keith Lamar's story is a haunting tale of extreme isolation and resilience. After a tragic event in his youth, he found himself in the unforgiving clutches of the penal system. But it was when he was sentenced to unaliving after being convicted of 5 inmate unalivings during the Lucasville uprising that his journey into the depths of solitary confinement truly began. For an astonishing 27 years, Lamar existed in his nightmarish world of isolation within the Supermax prison in Ohio. His world was confined to a room barely larger than a bathroom, with a mere crack in the wall as his tenuous link to outside. In that suffocating space, he endured 23 hours of solitude every day. Yet amidst this relentless isolation, Lamar's spirit endured. He and fellow inmates fought for their humanity, sparking change within the prison system itself. Their hunger strike in 2011 led to small but meaningful victories, such as the right to hug their family members during visits, breaking through the cold barrier of the plexiglass. And at number 1 is Albert Woodfox. Albert Woodfox's story, a tale of unparalleled resilience in the face of extreme adversity, sheds light on the harrowing realities of prolonged solitary confinement. Incarcerated in '65 for armed robbery, Woodfox, alongside Herman Wallace and Robert King, the Angola 3, endured years of isolation at the Louisiana State Penitentiary, ironically located at a former plantation. Woodfox spent 43 years confined to a 6-by-9-foot cell, subjected to claustrophobia, gas attacks, confrontations, and other forms of torment. His determination to resist inhumane conditions and unconstitutional treatment remained unyielding. Amidst his torment, Woodfox educated himself and fellow inmates, teaching them to read and write. His activism extended beyond prison walls, protesting deplorable conditions, racial injustice, and exploitative labor practices. His release in 2016 at the age of 69, marked a turning point, with his advocacy against solitary confinement continued. Woodfox's legacy is a testament to the indomitable human spirit, demonstrating that even in the darkest circumstances, hope and determination can endure, refusing to let prison staff define one's identity and beliefs. While some of these prisoners were eventually released and became advocates for criminal justice reform, their experiences continue to serve as stark reminder of the psychological and physiological toll that extreme isolation can take on individuals.
On to number 2, Destiny Hoffman. Originally supposed to serve just 48 hours total in jail, Hoffman would end up spending 154 days there after a judge seemingly forgot to issue her release order. On August August 22nd, Clark County Circuit Court Judge Jerry Jacoby ordered Hoffman to be held without bond until further order of the court. The only issue is he totally forgot about that order until 5 months later. Apparently she was jailed without legal counsel or a hearing, which, as far as I'm concerned, is against her rights as an American. She was arrested after diluting her drug test, which was a violation of her original court order program. No one is sure why she didn't speak up about her sentence exceeding the 48-hour period, and it seems the only reason she was released is because a prosecutor reviewing old files noticed something didn't add up. Upon requesting an immediate update on the situation, Hoffman would be released. She has since filed a civil suit, but I cannot speak on the outcome of that.
And finally, at number 1 is Jesse Pomeroy. Born in 1859, Jesse was a convicted murderer and the youngest person in Massachusetts to ever have been convicted of first-degree murder. He targeted boys, and so a lot of them ended up dead, as you can imagine. If you've seen The Alienist, the bad guy in that was based off him. And I watched that, and that was messed up. He was pronounced guilty in 1874 and also sentenced to death, but the death warrant was never signed. The council voted several times to have Governor Gaston sign the warrant, but he never did, and so the death penalty was changed to him serving out his sentence in solitary confinement. In 1876, he was transferred to the state prison in Charleston, where he was sent to solitary at the age of 16. He apparently taught himself to read many languages in that time, like Hebrew. He wrote poetry, studied law, and tried to escape 10 to 12 times, so confinement was quite productive for Jesse. He even lost an eye after trying to destroy one side of his cell with a gas pipe. In 1917, he was finally allowed to join the rest of the jail and later died in 1932 from old age.